Hello, and welcome to The Road Already Traveled, a podcast where we feature lessons from successful entrepreneurs and the professionals that serve them as they share their inspiring stories and insights. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, I'm Rich Schutte, your host of The Road Already Traveled, where we share lessons from entrepreneurs, like-minded business owners, and the professionals that serve them, providing valuable insight to those listeners that are on the same journey. This episode is brought to you by Avalan, a wealth management firm dedicated to personalized financial, business, and investment planning for entrepreneurs as they make their way in our chaotic world. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? At Avalan, we believe that wealth isn't just about numbers, but it's about freedom, security, and living life on your terms. Wherever you are in your entrepreneurial journey, our team of experts is here to guide you every step of the way. There are no cookie-cutter solutions, just smart, personalized strategies designed for your goals. Using our unique Optimal Entrepreneur program and an unwavering focus on world-class service, our relationships are built to last generations, helping clients achieve lifelong goals through a thoughtful and consultative approach. Visit avalanwealth.com today and start building the future you deserve. That's Avalan wealth.com. Today, I have Russell Benaroya here from Timberlane, who has actually come to me. This is the world is so cool. Like when you live in these entrepreneurial circles, I came to find out, not in my initial introduction to Russell, that not only is he a fellow EOer or Entrepreneurs Organization member like I am, and also touches our industry in areas that, we reach out to people and he reaches out. It's like there's all these synergies, but none of that was known to either one of us when we wound up meeting at a destination wedding in Mexico. Whereas it turns out that his wife is close to my partner's very best friend who is going through this wedding ceremony down in Cabo, which was an epic time. But what a cool way to ultimately kind of cross paths. It's great to have you here today, and thanks for spending a few minutes with us.
Well, I mean, I like to say, yes, we were in Cabo for somebody else's wedding, but I would say that was the beginning of what has become a really nice bromance with you. Like, I think we've developed a great relationship, so it's a pleasure to spend time chatting.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I'm going to take a minute and read a little bit of your bio. I think everyone deserves to know who you are. It's pretty impressive. I'm going to skip over a little bit of that because there's some questions we're going to start in the beginning that are going to kind of tee into some of the things that you told us about here. But just as a good start, Russell's a real estate investor, an entrepreneur, and author who spends time helping people achieve their highest and best use by unlocking their genius zones. Russell has spent the last 20 years in investment banking, private equity, and entrepreneurship, and today is the COO at Timberlane Partners, which is a private multifamily real estate investment and development firm based in Seattle. Russell is also the author of One Life to Lead, Business Success Through Better Life Design. And I've read that, and it's a great read, and it's definitely things that we need to be thinking about as entrepreneurs. I would encourage you to all check that out, and we're going to put that in the notes of the podcast as well. Moving this family to Costa Rica in 2018 helped Russell realize the immense privilege we have to be the architects of our lives and the positive impact we can have on our businesses and teams by better managing ourselves. He's appeared in Forbes, the Puget Sound Business Journal, and a bunch of other places, recipient of 40 Under 40 in the PSBJ in Seattle, founder of Free Yourself to Work on Your Business, an undergraduate of UCSB, another one of these connections because we're based in Santa Barbara, which is crazy how this all developed, as I mentioned earlier. A business school graduate of Anderson at UCLA, which is, kind of baller if you were to ask me, and as a longtime member of VO. He lives in Seattle with his wife, Melissa, and has two children, Devin and Shane, 19 and 17. So, wow. I don't even know if we need to go on.
We do a lot. The road already traveled is, it's a busy road, but it's been fun.
So that's what I really love about this podcast, right? Is we have this friendship that we've built. There's so much that I know about you and so much that I don't, and so many cool aspects of your journey. And that's the whole point of what we're doing, right? Is like to share these stories, to give others, ideas, a feeling of camaraderie, right, with the people that are on this same journey. And I think that that's what's so cool about it. So, as you know, and I'd shared some of these questions with you before, and as our listeners know, these are questions I ask everybody. We're going to start with a few personal questions to kind of like, let the audience get to like you as much as I have over the last several years.
Oh boy.
But talk to us, I should say, a little bit about what most people don't know about you. Maybe some quirks, hobbies, strange habits, something that makes you tick.
Yeah. Well, I think that the topic that gives me the most energy in my life, that has really transformed my life, and that people tend to find interesting, and I appreciate that they do, is that I'm an avid ultra trail runner. And so what that means is today I will participate in 100-mile trail races. I have a 200-mile trail race that I've signed up for in June. I have not done it yet, so now I'm just a big talker on this podcast. But that journey, that experience, that opportunity for growth through being solo on trails for 20 to 40 hours has really been transformative in my life. It's definitely a quirk too. I mean, I call it a hobby, but I think it's made me a little quirky.
I would say you just did something pretty spectacular within the last few months. Want to share that?
Yeah. I think we all have bucket lists, and sometimes we trade on them, and sometimes we don't, and they just sort of remain on the list. But there was one in particular that I pulled the trigger on when you and I met. You didn't know this, so I'm sitting poolside in Cabo, and I'm reading a book that my wife gave me because I just recently turned 50. The book that she gave me was titled "You Only Die Once." You only die once. And the short narrative on that book is you have a certain number of weeks, of Mondays, really. You have a certain number of Mondays in your life, and you only have a certain number of Mondays left in your life. How are you going to spend those? And there had been this event that had been on my mind for many, many years. And sitting there poolside, the day I met you, in fact, I made the decision to go online and make the investment and sign up for an event that takes place in Morocco every year called the Marathon des Sables, or Marathon of the Sands. And it's a very iconic race that takes place in the Sahara Desert, and it entails a 150-mile self-supported multi-day stage race, 6 days across the Sahara, where you're responsible for carrying all of your own gear and are provided with water and shelter to sleep at night. And I trained for it and then competed in that in April. So one less thing on my bucket list.
So self-supported because they couldn't find people crazy enough to get out there and support all you do.
Exactly. Although the infrastructure required to support 900 people from around the world that find themselves like in the middle of the Sahara Desert is no small undertaking, but just another opportunity to experience an area of the world that certainly grew my world, and also give me an opportunity to self-reflect on what's possible.
Yeah, so that's fascinating to me, right? Because our next question, as many that have listened already are anticipating, what's the craziest thing you've ever done? I'd argue you may have already answered that question. You had something different to share.
Well, some people think it's crazy. There's a lot of judgments we have about what individuals can or can't do. It's a lot of self-judgment. Oh my gosh, I could never do that. I could never run 100 miles. And I'm here to tell you that yes, you probably can. It's just where you decide to put that energy and make that investment and train over time. Great athletes spend 90+% of their time practicing. and a very small amount of their time performing. And so it's just the endeavor of practice. So I don't think of it as like the craziest thing I've ever done. I mean, I think the craziest thing I've ever done is when you're a bit thoughtless, you're like not using your brain, you're not planning, you're not trained. And then you go do something like go bungee jumping off of an unsanctioned bridge in Washington State, where a few guys set up a bungee apparatus, and then you run out and you jump because you know it's not a sanctioned bridge and you don't want to get caught, but you then jump off a bridge and, fall 150 feet. Like, that's just dumb, right? That's just dumb. I don't think running 100 miles is dumb, although some people might.
There's something you said that I really want to kind of come back to, right? It's like, people say, I could never, right? People that are listening to this, by and large, are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurially minded people. And if you sit back and think about how the rest of the world views us and the things that we do in our day-to-day lives that we just consider to be normal, where they're sitting back going, I could never, right? It's like we are those 100-mile ultra marathoners, right, in our own right. And I love that you said that, because it really triggered that reaction, in me. What a great share.
A lot of endurance, a lot of endurance in our lives, right? And a lot of grit. And it just depends on where, what trail you're running.
Yeah, I think that's truly, truly epic. And by the way, it's like, I think that many of us can also relate to every morning when we get to our offices, some days when we get to our offices, we feel like we just jumped off that bridge. Maybe without a cord tethered to us.
That is true too. I was giving a presentation a month ago to some fellow EOers, in fact, and it was on this topic of ultra running. But the title of the presentation was that the longest distance is the 5 inches between your ears. It is not the 100 miles. It is it's managing your headspace in those periods of the great dip. And we all go through the dip, and the swirling that happens in our heads around the stories we tell ourselves about our worth, the implications, right? The fear. It's exhausting, but managing through that as we do, it's really exciting to know that you can get to the other side of that. And we call it the pain cave. You're in the pain cave for some period of time.
No doubt.
You just got to keep chipping away.
Lee Trevino also, related to that quote, and he was great with quotes, right? But he'd always said that the longest shot in golf is the distance between here and here.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. Like, I get it.
But
not an original title.
Appreciate one of his other quotes was when he had said, after having been struck by lightning several times, he says, the next time that I'm anywhere near lightning, I'm just going to hold a 1-iron up into the air, because even God can't hit a 1-iron.
I love it.
Quote. So interesting stuff. What was it like growing up, and where did you grow up?
Yeah, so as you said, I live in Seattle now. I grew up in Seattle, so the thriving Pacific Northwest. I went away, as again, you also in the introduction, I went away for college, and then I spent some time on the East Coast when I started off in my career in investment banking. But I've always fancied myself as a Pacific Northwesterner. I don't know if it's the outdoors, I don't mind the rain. Maybe it's the quality of life, but there's just a lot of magic that happens up here in Seattle in the Emerald City, and a lot of people like living here, and it's been a great place to raise a family.
That's awesome. Growing up, what did you want to, and were there any inspirations or large influences on those ideas of what you wanted to be?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with an entrepreneurial father. He ran a family business that was in the beer distribution business. I remember him telling me growing up that I absolutely do not want to be in that business, because I think it was during a time that was particularly stressful, like the power dynamic of being a small distributor when you have big manufacturers or breweries in this case that are dictating product that you can get or not get. And then you've got a bunch of truck drivers that are wanting to unionize. And so you got to manage your costs, and there's a lot of handshake deals. And it just wasn't the business that he was excited for me to be in. Now, whether or not he was right or wrong about that, I never would know, because he sold that business when I was in high school. The environment that I grew up in was one of a lot of grind, a lot of grit. My dad was an incredibly hard worker. And so that discipline got instilled in me very early on. But I didn't spend a lot of time wondering about, like, what could I be? What would I do? Other than the normal considerations, like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer, or like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, or something like that. And then when I got to college, I kind of went down the accounting route until I had an abroad experience as a junior in college, and I had a chance to intern at an investment bank, a private bank in London. And my mind kind of exploded about investment banking. And I got really excited and committed to it. And so when I got back to college for my senior year, it's not like a lot of investment banks from Wall Street were coming to UC Santa Barbara to recruit, even though UC Santa Barbara is a really great institution, has continued to grow in its reputation. But I went out to New York when I was a senior in college during a holiday break, and I essentially cold called on investment banks to meet with anybody that would meet with me, and managed to land an opportunity at Solomon Smith Barney, which is now part of Citigroup.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? How there's been so much consolidation in the space over the years that we've been, of professional age.
And it's also like, if you want to go after something, just showing up is so much of the game. Just like, get out there and shake their hand and have the conversation and get in front of people. And it's incredible how open mentors or potential mentors are to wanting to share their experience and help younger people figure out how to navigate a really unruly world. And that's my piece of advice for young folks today.
That's awesome advice. I'd suggest anyone right now listening just hits that 30-second back button and hear that again. Thanks for that share.
Yeah.
On this podcast, we've had guests that are entrepreneurs. We've had guests that service and help entrepreneurs along their journey, and we've had people that kind of are a crossover. And honestly, Russell, your story is so interesting. The work you've done with the book you wrote. Mm-hmm. Congratulations on reading a book. Mm-hmm. Wrote, and your mindset around that is something I want to spend more time getting into. But I also don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about how you serve entrepreneurs, right? And what you're doing with Timberlane. Mm-hmm. So often when an entrepreneur is working with, various different advisors, they're working in traded markets, and they're working with, assets they have tied up in their business. And if they start to get into other types of alternative investments, it typically winds up being these enormous institutions that are like these, ginormous, freight cargo ships going across the sea that don't necessarily always have the ability to navigate the best deals in what they're providing, but they have incredible distribution channels. And so we wind up in these crazy things that don't necessarily always work out. And Timberlane is so different there, right, in terms of a tool that entrepreneurs have. And I want to be careful, and we have all the disclosures. This isn't about soliciting, investment choices and advice and all that stuff. I want to talk more holistically about the importance of alternatives, right, in somebody's portfolio, why they matter. And I wanted you to talk a little bit, if you would, just in terms of the part of your passion project that gets tied up in what you're providing here and how it's making a difference. And after we kind of touch on that, then we can kind of go into the interesting part of your story as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that qualification, right? So anything that I say about Timberlane, we're not fundraising. There's no solicitation, right? All of that. But happy to talk about alternatives writ large and why I think an organization like Timberlane has a really interesting strategy. I was having coffee with a friend of mine yesterday who's a reasonably savvy investor and has made investments over time, not just in the public markets like many people do, but also a number of private equity related investments. And one thing that like really struck him, but also struck me, is that we're sitting across the table from one another, and he's looking at a representative of this alternative investment firm called Timberlane Partners. And he's looking into the whites of my eyes, and he's listening to me talk about how we think about the multifamily. We happen to be in the apartment space, in the multifamily segment, what I think about the trends that are happening in the Pacific Northwest and areas of the Mountain West. He's asking me about the current opportunity. And what makes that little story relevant is alternative investments are very opaque, or they tend to be perceived as very opaque. And what generally creates some of the best outcomes over time is the trusted relationship that can be built between advisor like you and the alternative investment manager, or your client, and knowing that they can pick up the phone and call that investment manager. So what we've found is that operating with a bit of a boutique mindset, but having some of that institutional rigor that connotes, trust and confidence and security, has been incredibly important. Well, why is it important? It's important because unlike a public security, which you can trade in and out of on a very unemotional basis, or emotional basis sometimes, right, whenever you want, most alternative assets or asset classes are long-term in nature, right? So they're long-term holds. They're not liquid in the sense that you can call up and say, hey, I want to get out of that position. So you have to believe in the underlying hypothesis or the thesis for why this investment makes sense, and also be patient enough to let that market opportunity unfold, and confident enough that the group that you made the investment in is going to be a good steward of your wealth over a long period of time. We're not going on a date. I'm not saying we're getting married, but we're probably like engaged at a minimum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the truth. It's interesting, right? Because part of what makes an alternative investment so powerful inside of a portfolio, as a small part of it, is that illiquidity, right? It's illiquidity that allows it to behave differently than an ultra liquid market, right? Like our stock markets are, our bond markets are. And that's a huge part of that diversification. So those are really interesting pieces that you bring to the table here, like helping somebody understand the dynamic of what it takes to be able to be in something like that. And so that's
well, I think I think you're doing a lot of the work in how you're helping architect for your clients the kind of portfolio that's going to help them achieve their dreams. I mean, that's really what supporting entrepreneurs is about, which is, hey, entrepreneur or client, not every client needs to be an entrepreneur, but you're trying to achieve something in your life that's meaningful or purposeful for you. How can we help you as a guide have the resources in order to do that? And so that's a real balancing act for an advisor like you, Rich, which is like, okay, well, what do I have available to me to put together the right custom solution? And increasingly, alternative investments have a valuable role to play in that overall diversification strategy.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think it was an important thing for people to hear, right? Because the perception around it is sometimes, a little bit jaded, right? Because, you're working with these insane institutions that have one goal in mind, which is to benefit themselves, right? Versus to provide access. And so it was a great help and clarification. And one of the reasons why, we've looked to you for plugging in some of those holes, or plugging some of those holes for our clients. All right. So you talked about having an entrepreneurial father running a business. You talked about how that wasn't your shtick, how you went off and became an investment banker, which, what an incredible opportunity in terms of understanding business, how it operates, and, all of that other stuff, especially with an accounting background. It's like, so, you get this stuff. But I want to know, as far as the entrepreneurial piece of it, like where did you get started, right? What is that journey? When did you jettison the Madison Avenue tie and suit
Mm-hmm.
and head off into the world of shirt sleeves and et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah. So that essentially happened in 2004, 2005. And it's like a classic scenario of, hey, I'm going to go try this. And if it doesn't work, what's the worst thing that can happen? I got to go get another job. But once you get on that entrepreneurial train, and there's some high highs and there's some low lows, and we can talk about those, you know, 20 years later, right? I'm effectively still on that train, a little less so at Timberlane, because I'm supporting a couple of other entrepreneurs and helping them achieve their dreams as the principal founders of that business. Yeah, I think some of it is, in my own reflection, I think some of it is ego. At the age of, when you're 29, or I was 29 or 30, I thought I kind of knew everything, like we do. And the thought that was going through my head is, hey, I can go start a business. I can go do this. Like, we're in the business of financing businesses, right? Private equity you're investing in or acquiring. But I mean, this doesn't look that hard. I mean, like, I could probably do this. And, I think now's a good time to do it. Like, economically, I think it's a good time to do it. And so I had this idea, and I ended up pulling in a buddy of mine from business school and a physician in Seattle. And I left what I was doing, and we had 2 laptops and our cell phones, and we started a company called REM Medical. And REM Medical was in the business of operating comprehensive sleep medicine clinics. Now, what do I know about sleep? What do I know about healthcare? What do I know about starting a business? Well, not a lot, although I had a bit of exposure to this area of healthcare, which is what prompted my original interest. But I definitely leapt headfirst into entrepreneurship on a very intense scale, because I wasn't just like starting a business. I was starting a business in healthcare. We employed doctors. We had to get approved by Medicare. And so, mouth over fire hydrant for many, many years. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And if I had known what I was getting into, I would have been like, oh my gosh, no way. But then, like, most entrepreneurs wouldn't do anything. In fact, not knowing what some of those future pitfalls are is exactly what gives us the impetus to leap in the first place, with a bit of confidence that and an ego that it's like, I'm going to figure this out. And we generally do.
Yeah. Well, what was that like? I mean, figuring that out.
Super stressful. For a number of reasons. One is, we had raised capital, and so I didn't realize, that's another customer. Investors are customers too. I have a board, right? Board is customer. I have actual patients, right? Patients are customers. So getting really clear about who you serve and how you allocate your time to service each of those customers, extremely important. It was our first exposure really to OKRs, objectives and key results. We called them critical success factors. But that architecture, that strategic architecture of what do I want to accomplish? And how do I break that down into sufficient component parts that increases the confidence that if I achieve those component parts, that I'm going to achieve my bigger goal? And how do I make sure that we resource against those component parts, like a cascading of strategic planning? And some of this business framework aspect that I am a real believer in today really originated out of the trial and error of just trying to get a first thing off the ground.
How did that you talked about having these KPMs rocks, you call whatever they may be. We've all got different words for it. But you talked about setting those out. So how did you start to achieve those milestones along the way? What are some of the things that you were doing as this person that has gone from literally, drinking out of a fire hose, you starting to hit some of these milestones? What was that like, and where did you get traction in finding those results?
Yeah. Purpose. Having a purpose, a why. And by the way, I don't care if you're in financial services, which might feel like a little harder than if you're in healthcare, which might feel a little easier because you're like trying to improve lives, or you're in manufacturing. But having a why of how you want to serve is so empowering for the organizational culture, and to manifest that as like your number one rock. I'll use your language and EOS language, or your number one objective. What we set out to do was redefine talking about revenue to talking about impacting people's lives. And so our number one objective for the 1 6-month period was engage 1250, engage 1250, engage 1,250 patients. Well, how do we define engagement? Well, engagement is making sure that they're getting the requisite care that's being prescribed to them by their physician, which could be diagnostic in nature, it could be medication, it could be follow-up visits. But what happened is when we started to architect the way we talked about the business around the purpose of how we wanted to serve, knowing that by definition, if we engage 1250, we're going to build a great business economically. Like we're going to build a great business economically, but it certainly helps employees and myself, frankly, get up in the morning to know that like, oh, I'm focused on engage 1250. How many patients have we improved the lives of? And we needed a bit of mentorship from more experienced people to come into the organization and help us understand how valuable that structuring was to take what can seemingly feel like chaos in entrepreneurial environments and bring a bit of order and stability.
That's awesome. Purpose is so consistent with who I've gotten to know, right? I mean, that answer does not surprise or shock me in any way, shape, or form. But I do think that as entrepreneurs, right, that is something that we lose sight of, right? And I see that often, especially as someone has gotten longer in the tooth in their entrepreneurship journey through a particular enterprise that they've created, right? Is like we lose sight of that purpose, right? We get caught up in the day-to-day and in the business, and I got to do this and I've got to do that, and then we're scrambling, and then we forget what we started to do it for, and those things that mattered to us at the beginning fall to the wayside, and we burn out, and we do all this other stuff that's insane, right? And so the idea of keeping that purpose so front and center is so critical, and your share of that, I don't think there's a better message that our community could or should hear, right? It's about that purpose. And when you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, the ones that really get there, really make it, that we stand back in awe of, right? And go, wow, I would tell you that every single one of them has great purpose and have held to that purpose. So thank you for that. That's epic. And it doesn't have to be engage 1250, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be rocket science or something so big. It's like, mine is cheesy, right? Because it fits my personality. It's like, hey, my purpose is to save the world one entrepreneur at a time, right? That's okay. That's meaningful to me, right? Age 1250 was meaningful to you. That is a purpose that is worth striving for. And so I'm on a soapbox now. This is your interview, but you really triggered something inside of me that I'm getting goosebumps just talking about, in terms of really narrowing in on that.
Improving the lives of say yours again.
Changing the world
one entrepreneur at a time, right? Changing the world one entrepreneur at a time. What starts to make that so actionable is to say, okay, well, what does that mean? How will you know? How are you applying your zone of genius to doing that? So that if somebody asked you, not that we need to get all, engineering and operating oriented here, but if somebody asked you, how have you changed the world one entrepreneur at a time? Imagine you could say, I have impacted the lives of 5,000 entrepreneurs, and those 5,000 entrepreneurs employ 100,000 people, and those 100,000 people, like, you can see the exponential effect of your impact. And I'm not saying that, again, we need to operationalize, but when it's more than just Rich or it's more than just Russell, and we're in an organization, that we also want people to capture that and see, well, how is what I'm doing today changing the world one entrepreneur at a time? Because that's what, that's like our mantra, right? Then you see the power of building a robust organization. I think sometimes entrepreneurs, we keep our organization small because there's some fear, right? No judgment, right? There's some fear, or maybe there's lack of clarity, or maybe we're like, oh, I don't want a big company because I don't want to do this. But sometimes that's a function of not being clear enough around how you want to manifest that purpose, that it's hard to know how to scale.
Raise your hand mentally as you're listening to this if you're one that isn't doing more because you don't think you're worthy of it, right? And I've seen a lot of that in the entrepreneurial community. So think about that as well, right? It's finding your own worth in that vision and in that purpose. Because when your purpose is, again, going back to what you're talking about in genius zones, and I want to make sure people can point back to that.
Yeah.
We'll have that in show notes and we'll have you talk about it.
Sure.
But it's all really cool, and it's so critical, because when you have that North Star, that guiding light, your vision, your purpose, it's like all of a sudden it's like you do start to matter, right? And you are good enough, and you do deserve what you ultimately are chasing and seeking. And more importantly, your clients, your users, whatever your business may be, they deserve you to be good enough to deliver that idea to them, right? So that's awesome.
Live your worth. Don't prove your worth. Maybe the best piece of advice I ever received from a business coach, that I still live your worth. Don't prove your worth. You're already worthy, right? You have nothing to prove, right? So don't spend time feeling like the next accomplishment or the next circumstance or the next accolade or the next article or the next nomination or the next promotion is delivering your worthiness. You got it. You got it, my friend.
Dude, this is great. And we're getting a little bit deeper here. Well, shocker that we're
as we do.
Right. That's what we do. There's a lot of things I don't want to gloss over. The one thing that I want to remember is, we want to be respectful of everybody's time, right? Especially our listeners. But and you've had other businesses, right? This sleep deal was not, you didn't sleep on that, right? You have other businesses. No. So, if you think across your journey and all the things that you've done, and one of the biggest things we want to try and do in this podcast, right, is let people learn from some of our biggest wins, right? And you'd mentioned these earlier, and some, the highs and the lows, right? So maybe there's a couple of wins that you're particularly proud of, that could be learning points for people listening in, and as well as we also learn from misery, right? We like to be miserable together sometimes, unfortunately, but maybe, some points along the way that were troughs or low, or mistakes that you made that people could learn from as well.
Yeah, sure. I would say one of my biggest highs was somewhat business, but not entirely business related, but it was the decision that my family and I made in 2018 to move to Costa Rica for a year. And I'm going to put that in the business category because I was at a moment in my life where I was on a particular track of laser focused entrepreneurship. What's the next startup? And my spouse was not was not on that same program, and maybe that will also factor into my low for a second. So we made a decision to design our next chapter together, and move with our kids to San Jose, Costa Rica, and build a life there for a year, not knowing exactly what that would entail. Now, that was a high because in hindsight, it took a lot of courage to deviate from what I thought people expected of me. It took a lot to deviate from that. The low was the circumstance around how that arose. And the circumstance around how that arose was a conversation that my wife and I had driving back from a ski trip with our kids. And we're listening to this Tony Robbins podcast, and it's snowing and the wipers are on like full bore, and I'm navigating, but I'm listening intently to this podcast. And the title of the podcast was 3 Steps to a Breakthrough. Tony Robbins, of course, motivating. And he said the 3 steps to a breakthrough are you got to be able to change your story, your strategy, or your state. Can be state of mind or state like your geographic like presence. And I turned down the radio or turned down the podcast, and I said to my wife, because Tony Robbins had made some comment, I said, yeah, Melissa, why don't we ever talk about where we're going to be in 5 years? Something prompted me to ask that in a very critical nature. And she said, oh, that's because it's never been about us. It's always been about you, and I've been along for the ride, or we've been along for the ride. And I'm sharing that because it was the instantiation. It was the moment of realization that something had to change, or not had to. Actually, that's a judgment. I wanted something to change. And entrepreneurship is high highs and low lows. I'm a servant leader. I'm the guy that pays myself last. I'm the guy that does whatever it takes to keep the thing alive, right? And I've had instances where, you almost don't make payroll, and you really sacrifice and don't always think about the sacrifice that's happening all around you, right? To the people that are affected by this decision that you've made. But the idea of being able to make a decision in partnership with my spouse was transformational, and captures maybe one of the highest points of my life, but at a moment that began as really one of the lowest.
Wow. Going back again to purpose, it's like if you don't serve your purpose on the home front, how can you serve it on the business front?
Hence the book that I know you're going to put in the show notes, which is, how do you bring the best of you? How do you do your work, your inner work, to bring the best of you into the business that you lead, rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to make this business successful, then I'm going to do all this work on myself to be the best that I can be. It's like, no, it's the other way. It's the other way around. How you show up in your business so dramatically impacts how your customers relate to you, how your employees relate to you, how open and creative you are to setting strategy, how engaged you are with your team to embrace conflict, to be candid, to have integrity, right? Where does that all come from? That doesn't come from you going into work every day. It comes from all the work that you're doing outside to make sure that you're adhering to a life design that captures the best of who you want to become.
That is remarkable. Usually there'd be a few questions that I ask following that. I don't know if there's much that I don't know if I want to take away from that. That was incredibly impactful, and I think that entrepreneurs have some of the highest divorce rates right, of any other demographic in the country. And there's reason for that. And I alluded to it earlier, right, that we lose sight, we forget why we're doing what we're doing. And the way you brought that back, I mean, full circle for me, just listen to say is beyond impactful, right? It's like taking that time out to recognize that our journeys are only a reflection of who we are and how, to your point, how we show up in our journey. And that is beyond epic. Yeah, I save our traditional last question. I am literally going to leave it at that. But I will ask our traditional last question, but before I ask it, I want to give you the opportunity to point people wherever you may want to point them to, maybe find you, find your book. Just give a little plug for those listening.
Yeah, great. I mean, thank you for introducing the work that we're doing at Timberlane Partners, and so you can certainly find us online. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about how that's an important feature of overall like life planning and financial planning. I do have a website, russellbenaroya.com. Where there are some helpful links there to some blogs that I've written over the years. There's a bit of information on that recent race across the Sahara. And listen, if somebody is interested in connecting with me, it's which they can do through there. It's an absolute pleasure. And thanks for giving me the platform for being able to introduce myself.
Yeah, this was a moving conversation for me personally. I hope everyone else felt the same. But that last question, right? At the end of the day, whether you're selling or retiring or moving on or simply taking your last breath, what is it that you want to be remembered for in this world?
I think so. I've had some really cool meetings this week with friends, and I mean, I call them friends, but maybe they started off as like business folks, business acquaintances. And what I really enjoy is, and I know you enjoy this too, is getting to know people and asking a lot of questions. And I think if I were remembered for anything, it's that when people were around me, they felt heard, that I was somebody who allowed them or gave them the space to share with me a little bit below the surface in a way that I could receive it as a very receptive ear, and somebody that helps them walk out of that meeting feeling like, oh, this is somebody that really saw me.
That's actually beautiful. And if you think about it, that statement ties very closely into what I see, as your individual purpose as to who you are. So as we part, I'm going to ask everyone listening to think about that, right? Think about how you want to be remembered, and think about how that ties into your purpose and how you're living in a way that you'll be remembered the way you want to be remembered. That's going to do it for this episode of The Road Already Traveled. We appreciate you tuning in. Russell, this has been a pure pleasure and joy. Make sure that you look for us on all the popular podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. Like, click, subscribe, all those good things to make sure you don't miss the next bit of information that's going to take you to the next level. And once again, thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks, Rich.
As always, thanks for joining us on the Road Already Traveled podcast. We're grateful you've joined our community and look forward to seeing you again for our next installment. So be sure to click subscribe so you won't miss a thing. This communication is for informational purposes only and does not purport to be a complete statement of all material facts related to any company, industry, or security mentioned. This material is limited to the dissemination of general information pertaining to its diversified services. The opinions expressed reflect our judgment now and are subject to change without notice and may or may not be updated. The information provided, while not guaranteed as to accuracy or completeness, has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable. Financial planning, advisory, and/or consulting services offered through Avalan LLC, a registered investment advisor. Prospects or clients who take advantage of any free consultations or services are under no obligation to hire Avalan LLC as their investment advisor. Listeners who are not market professionals or institutional clients of Avalan LLC should seek the advice of their financial advisor before making any investment decisions based on this communication. Additional information on any securities mentioned is available on request.